Greetings, and thank you for joining me for the presentation, Enhancing Peaceful Student Interactions, a look at leadership in motion. My name is Dr. Ri'Cha Sancho, and this is the NAMI 2020 conference. The goals of today's program, the goals of today's program is to inform the audience of the rebirth of civil leadership. And this is actually a mechanism that can be used to help improve the interactions that your students have with each other, or what we call peer-to-peer interactions. The second goal is to motivate participants, all of you, each of you, to seek and find ways to inspire these positive interactions amongst your particular student body. There's a disclosure, and there is a research area up here. You see the note of the text that says research. This is just to let you know that there will be research given on the particular slide or in something that I'm saying, so that you might want to find it in the reference area at the end of this particular presentation. The disclosure is, this presentation will show how one traditionally segregated environment is reducing the perils of prejudice by focusing on elementary audiences to enact change, specifically meaning that the area in which this particular study has taken place was in a school system that is seated or rooted in an environment that has been traditionally infused with racism, systematic racism, and also discrimination amongst residents, individuals, the state as a whole, the region as a whole. We are in, this study was done in the southeastern United States. So some of the featured studies will demonstrate the harmful effects of poor student social interactions, what happens when they have these poor interactions with each other, and then the effects that they culminate with when it's also infused with the perceptions of what our teachers and our school leaders and our district leaders are, the perceptions of the students of those particular individuals. It says, such as unfair disciplinary systems aimed at minorities. We do know that this, by looking at our research, this is something that does actually happen, especially at the research level of preschool individuals and preschool teachers who are in in-service training. We'll actually look at that a little bit further later on. The mistrust of education leaders by students. This can create terrible student interactions when our students do not trust the education leaders. And we have a rise in bullying when peer-to-peer interactions happen because there are prejudicial reasons there, because of socioeconomic issues there, because of other issues that take place and students are bullying each other, then we know that their interactions are no longer positive. And then future incarceration. What does that mean? Well, what that means is when students have poor interactions with one another inside of our school systems, it can lead to future incarceration. Unfair disciplinary systems happen, and then it can lead to unfair practices down the line, unfair perceptions of paranoia, and perceptions of just truth in terms of discrimination. And then that can lead to future incarceration, because we know that our retention is nil for our students. So we want to make sure that we look at these things, we keep them in mind as we go through the particular program. We'll have happy times too, but also just to take note of that, put it in the back of your mind. This is what research is telling us is actually happening amongst our students at the elementary level. Okay. For this particular study, you might want to know, what were the reasons for implementing this program? What reasons did the actual school district and the school have for implementing such a program at the elementary level, a leadership program at the elementary level? That is not typical. The first was escalation. This means that there was an escalation in disciplinary issues amongst the elementary students across several different elementary schools, but in this one in particular, there was an escalation of those practices. Students were not getting along, peer-to-peer interactions were a bit negative. And then we have bullying. Well, we know what that means specifically, but some students were bullying each other because they were in gangs, and sometimes those gangs meant a separation in ethnic minorities within the school system that was mostly comprised of minority students or ethnically minority students. And then we have cohesion. Cohesion in this particular sense is speaking about the ability to be able to get along, get together, gel together in some type of way that was not taking place with the students. So we had a weapons charge or a weapons listing inside of the state data for the particular school. So all of these particular areas were showing up in state data. And of course, there was no cohesion in our academics as well as our regular discipline, our behavior. They were separate. Okay, so that's the reason why this particular program is implemented at this particular school. But what about other schools? What does research tell us is a reason why schools will implement intervention programs? The first is changing demographics. Oftentimes we now see here in the United States that our demographics are constantly fluctuating, and we have individuals from different backgrounds who are dissimilar from our own, sometimes coming into our neighborhoods as new residents. We have building going on, contractual building, where new homes are going up and maybe apartments are being erected, and people are just coming from everywhere. So we are having a change in our demographic background, and that's why sometimes schools find it necessary to find programs to implement to ensure that the climate of the school remains peaceful and, of course, safe for all students. Another is an increase in civic knowledge and community service orientation. This means that there has been a focus, a large focus and a push for students to become more democratically mindful, to know what their rights are and how our system of democracy works here in the United States. And that's considered to be the civic knowledge, the civic component. And through that, a lot of times community service projects, youth participatory action groups are put together so that that knowledge can be increased. So that is why some of these intervention programs are put together. Then we have acculturation, enculturation, and or assimilation. Sometimes some of the global school systems that we learn about implement programs because they are trying to instill one of these particular features or modes of thinking amongst the student body. Acculturation, meaning that our cultural differences as well as our mainstream will infuse together for a harmonious, seamless way of being. Enculturation means that we'll have a primary focus to remain attached to our ethnic minority or our ethnic or our ethnicity, those that are a part of our ethnicity in that community, rather than engaging so much with the mainstream. And assimilation, of course, you know, is when we put our own traditional values, our cultural values to the side, or sometimes it is described in research as it's put to the background, it's in the background, and then we just accept the new mainstream society we're a part of. Change the tide, increase institutional trust, which we just learned about. The students are not trusting their school systems, and that institutional trust is a huge issue. You can look again at the study by Yeager at the end, starts with a Y, if you want to learn more about that. So here's a question for you. You will note on some of the slides, there will be a question at the very bottom, and I ask that you take some time to maybe make a vocal memo into your phone, or type a note or write a note to kind of jot down your ideas to answer these questions as you move forward, to give you something to think back on, your thought process of exactly what we are looking at today and how can it be a benefit to you in your school systems. So what do you know about your school system? I'll give you just 2 seconds here to maybe jot something down that comes to mind that you might want to change in your school system. Something that you know that's happening that it needs to change, and maybe that will help your peer-to-peer interactions become more sound. Okay, as you do that, we're going to move here to the overarching purpose. The overarching purpose of this entire study was basically here to examine how this particular program was implemented and why it was implemented, how it operated, and this civil leadership component that was advertised on brochures, that the students are going to learn to be civil and that it was a leadership program. And then, of course, there was extreme interest. This was an exploratory study, but there was an extreme interest as to how and why is this being implemented at the elementary level, how is this being done? And then my particular focus that most of my work has been in, and my interest and my passion is in, is culturally relevant pedagogy. To what extent was this actually being delivered in the particular program? And what makes it so interesting is that the ethnicity of the students was not known intentionally before going in to start working with the school and district leaders, intentionally, so that there wouldn't be a bias in the actual methodology of the study itself. But upon gaining some information initially, I knew that the entire district, or it was known that the entire district, experienced these particular changes according to data, state data. From 2016 to 2019, there was that first reason that we saw while other places sometimes implement these particular programs because of changing demographics. Well, take a look here. In this particular community, there was an increase in the ethnic minorities that lived in this particular community, from 58% to 64% in just 3 years' time. And I understand that now those numbers are even more different, a little more diverse, with the ethnic minority number still increasing. Ethnic minorities were considered to be, and they were listed in the data fold as Asian, African American, Pacific Islander, Latino, as opposed to Latinx. These were the 4 groups that made up this ethnic minority grouping on the data site. And then, of course, we had white for our other group, and you can see that there was a decrease in the population from 16 to 19. You can take a look at the quote up here. I won't bother to read it to you, but it just helps us to understand that more and more schools are trying to figure out what programs to implement in order to make differences in the way that their students get along with each other and the way that they're able to behave civilly and lead themselves in that way in a regulatory sense. Okay. So how was this program implemented? What actually happened? I thought it was pertinent to understand what the steps were, because I understood that typically sometimes the district leaders would pick a program, or the school leaders would be in charge of picking a program that they wanted to implement into their school. And that was the way that the program became implemented. In this particular situation, the community organization, imagine that it is something similar to a human relations council or an advocacy organization that was trying to do something for students, or their goal and their mission was to increase student understanding or cultural awareness, something of this nature, and leadership to help them to broaden their horizons in terms of getting greater careers. Well, this particular organization actually went to the school district, and they asked about implementing this program on a piloting basis, and they wanted to cater to 4th and 5th grade students in a cohort setting, and that was who their target audience was going to be. Well, the reason this program became implemented, and we know why they wanted to have a program to work with the students, but the way it became implemented was through this trust, which was unexpected. The community organization ended up being a community partner. So the organization appointed a partner to go to the district, and that partner worked with district leaders. After that, they brought in the school principal, and the trust was still there. The school principal, as a participant in the study, was able to explain that this particular community organization was known throughout the community, and they all felt very confident and very safe in knowing that this organization was going to do something that was top-notch, that would assist their students. They didn't have a doubt about it. Okay, so it was based on trust, the implementation, not necessarily alignments nor matrices or any of that, no type of study in terms of those particular parameters, but because of trust. The next step was to engage the school assistant principal, I'll just say the AP. The school principal spoke to the AP, and they became collaborators in how to bring in the community partner in the most effective way. So they set up the schedules, they looked at the time, because this program would take place within the school system for, as I said, 4th and 5th grade students. They wanted 2 cohorts, which would host about 20 to 22 students per class. Well, they needed to carve out time in the schedule because it would happen during the day. They needed to also make sure that this was done with the awareness of faculty and staff, and that it fit within the parameters of what they were trying to do in terms of their educational efforts in teaching students, to make sure they still had the instructional time necessary to accomplish their goals. The next set of individuals who were called to the table, because it cannot be done without them, it could not be done without them, were the parents. The parents needed to know what this program was, who this third party was going to be, what their students were supposed to learn, and of course, what were the expectations for them as parents in terms of supporting their children. Another riveting surprise, mentoring. This program listed a host of benefits that students would achieve or experience, but one was mentoring. And it was interesting as we moved throughout the study that in terms of mentoring, where you have a person who is appointed one-on-one with another student to help them grow and move throughout their school years or throughout a certain duration of time, or even one individual who's from our community who is helping to take care of and kind of monitor and watch several students, that's not exactly what we found as we moved through the study. We found that it was definitely something a little greater than mentoring, but it was proposed to our parents, as well as some district leaders had the idea that they would become leaders and would have mentoring opportunities through that leadership from outside community guests. The last group of individuals, and most important perhaps, because this is the group we're trying to help mold and help achieve something new, were our students. Another surprise at this point, that the students were actually going to be a part of a single gender classroom. So not only were there going to be 2 cohorts, but these students would also be single gender males, and the group would be an ethnically diverse group of single gender males. So that was also a wonderful surprise in the exploratory study. Knowing the demographics for the entire community was one thing, but then knowing who I would actually be able to watch and observe as I spoke to these particular district leaders and as we kind of monitored what was happening was even more special. So we have 4th and 5th graders, I'm just reminding you, 20 to 22 in each class, and they are ethnically diverse and they are all minority males. So the question I have for you at the bottom of this particular slide is, do you implement through collaboration? Take a few seconds to think about that and jot down some notes. Is there some place where collaboration in your implementation of programs at your school level or at your district level or your community partnership level? I'm speaking to community leaders in that statement. Is there some area where collaboration could be greater? Maybe you want to make a note because this is the actual flow of what happened in this school. And if you are a community organization, you can see that it did work for an actual organization to approach the school district as opposed to the school district or the school leaders trying to find a program that will work for them. Okay, we have a small pie chart here, and at the top you will see the word investors as opposed to stakeholders. Why do we say investors? Because each one of these groups at the bottom, our district leaders, our school leaders, and our community partners, all 3 have a fiduciary responsibility to ensure that funds are being spent properly inside the school environment. But give a thought that each one of these groups also has to make sure that their fiduciary responsibility is being monitored, is being used properly when they are paying regular taxes, when they are participating in activities that happen in their environment. We are all investors in the education of students, whether we have children or not. We are paying somehow for their particular achievement. So we might as well take an interest in it, no? Okay, our next section here says ambience. So I'm going to stop this for a second and keep reading to you. The main focus here with ambience is, are we visibly showing that we are infusing or promoting a certain theme in our school systems? Or is it not actually visible to those who are outside of our school system? Is it even visible to everyone, like our faculty and staff that's inside of our school system? You know, here's a question for you to consider as leaders. So in this particular study at the district level, there was a model that was used, and it was inclusive of cultural appreciation and active engagement for diversity at the district level, and then of course it was permeated into each of the schools. So every school that I went into had this framed image. It's like a graphic of the district model that was well versed in saying that they expected everyone to show an appreciation for diverse cultures, diverse individuals, behaviors that were respectful, and also high academics and achievement. And this was present in actual frames throughout the district building, which was a very large building. It was a very large district, and also throughout the school that I visited, and even other schools at the high school level, and one another at, I believe, at the elementary level. These images were visible. It also showed consistency and that they were promoting an idea visibly of a reduction of prejudice in our thinking or in the perceptions of those who worked in the school system and who attended, those students. The next one says consistent promotion of district to broader community. What this means is that the program and other programs across the district schools were promoted to newspapers. They were placed in media. They were put on their social media. They were placed on the website. They were given in terms of small newsletters to community activist groups and advocacy groups, and that included the faculty and staff success as well as student successes that took place at all different levels in terms of the schooling, not just in this particular program, even though they did all of this, but also where academics were concerned, where extracurricular activities and after school programs were concerned. They were showing the greater community how successful the district was in these areas, and also saying and reaching out to them to say, hey, we want you to come and join us. Come and see what we're doing. And the last one says efforts to collaborate with school administrators, visit and report. Okay, what this means is that the district leaders actually took time out of their day. I believe it was every 4 months or so. They would go, or every 3 months, they would go into the school. No, and they would see what the students were doing. They wanted to see in this program in particular, how the students were faring, what kind of changes they noticed in the student demeanor and in the students' behavior from the time that they first started. They were checking the ambience, okay, to see if it changed. As you see, my background has changed. The ambience is a little bit different. And inside this particular school, I just want to say that not only did they have music, that was soothing music playing in the front lobby, that it almost looked like a home with comfortable sofas and chairs and curtains and mats with phrases all over the walls that talked about cultural appreciation from different renowned and famous ethnic minorities, to give students something to show, or to show students that they were being appreciated, that their culture was being considered by not just their classroom teachers, but by the school and the district as a whole. That we know through research efforts and information, it makes a tremendous impact on the way our students see their education system. So your question now is, how is cultural inclusion visible in your setting, wherever you are? Take a minute to jot down a note. Do you see it? Is it visible or is it not visible? Okay, so remember, the greater public may not know that the district was actually visiting these schools. That was something that's not visible. The greater public is not able to see an MOA, a memorandum of agreement between a program or an organization and the school district. They may not even know that's taking place, but a lot of effort goes into what you are doing as leaders in your school systems, education systems, and communities, to make sure that students are given these opportunities to achieve. So now we have all of this in place and everyone is ready to go. The parents are on board and they become the red slice of the pie in our pie chart. They are now here to show their support. They must sign a letter and read the brochures, or they might read or may not read it, but they definitely have to sign the letter that gives their children the opportunity to participate in the program, and it also talks about the expectations. One expectation for all students in this program is that they all needed to have a certain uniform that was comprised of a button-down white shirt and some khakis. They needed to have on a certain color of socks. Their hair needed to be just so, and they needed to be on time, and they needed to be dressed this way every single week when they came to this particular course. Not only that, but they were expected to maintain their grades. We want to tell you right now that this particular study was not done on students or who were at risk. Or I should say the program, because the study really had nothing to do with that part. But the program itself was not for at-risk students. The program was for students who were borderline students. And apparently one of the facilitators who created the program, they wanted that particular piece to be there because they said there will always be resources for students who are at risk. But sometimes it's more difficult to find those resources for students who may be borderline. They might be a C student when in fact we can push them or bump them up, give them some type of encouragement, and they can become a B student instead of a C student, or a B student can become an A student. So it's not for the very high students, the program was not, and it was not for the students who might be considered at risk. It was for the students who were borderline. Okay, now we move into the separation of duties. So there's some research I want to share with you here as we are speaking about this separation of duties. We typically see something similar to this in business or accounting, but in this particular study, it was important. Why is it important to have a separation, first of all, of the duties, and what are the duties? It's because at each level, each group, and each participant group, as you will see them demonstrated here, we have the district level, the community partners as well, who ended up being our facilitators. They are here at these different levels, district, school, and community partners. What is it that they were in charge of? What do they need to do to ensure this program was implemented? Well, first, the staff and the faculty at the school level, they were very, very helpful. The administrator, which was the assistant principal, now has assumed the responsibility of monitoring this program and will report back to the principal. And I mean that the participant explained to me every time there was a session, whether it was once or twice a week, this particular AP was there to check in on students to make sure they were doing what they needed to do and to make sure that the facilitator had everything they needed. In addition to that, the school also supplied one staff member to be inside of the class for each classroom program session. And I want to say that this was a policy of the school so that you'll understand that it wasn't a nicety, it was something that had to be done because it was part of the policy, that there must be someone else inside that classroom with the facilitator at all times and the students. So there was a staff member who would rotate in and out, not the same staff member every time, I understand. Sometimes it was the guidance counselor, sometimes it was the front office staff person who was not busy at that particular time period. And sometimes there may have been a series of volunteers who were able to assist. Then you have the facilitator. What's the job of the facilitator other than to just provide this program and push it forward and teach it to the students and educate them? Well, one part of their particular duty was arts opportunities. They were in charge of making sure students were able to go to museums and on field trips outside of the state so that they could see representations of themselves as ethnic minorities and other individuals outside of the state, and also to see dissimilar groups and to interact with them. They particularly made sure this component was achieved by having guests to come into the class. I believe it was twice a month, and these guests ranged from community leaders to astronauts. One astronaut I know in particular was looked towards to ensure that they could come in and speak to the students, and was a female in another state, and that was done via online or virtual distancing. So these students were able to interact with an array of individuals, and when they experienced these art opportunities, they got to leave the school campus, and that gave them an even large amount of exposure, larger exposure to those individuals who they would not normally see in their everyday lives. We want to add here the student component. These students were a part of a school that was a Title I school, which we'll talk about more a little bit later briefly, but they had some responsibilities. Their duties were to show civility at all times, to show self-awareness and have that to grow, and academic organization, meaning they were taught that they needed to be civil, they were taught to become self-aware, they learned how to do things like assist each other and tie their ties. There were signs on the wall, and frequently they were told that they needed to think and act interdependently. which means that we have a dependency on more than one thing. So two things are dependent on each other, interdependent. They were taught to become dependent on one another. So they taught each other how to behave. They reminded each other when they were not behaving. And the facilitator made this constant effort to ensure that they were reminded of this. And additionally, the students were responsible for academic organization. If they were to misbehave in their classes, the community facilitator was the person who was interacting with the faculty, and they made it clear that they wanted to know if the students were showing any behavior changes, if their grades were dropping for any reason, because then some of those arts opportunities would be taken from them and they would not be able to participate. So that did help the students to begin to regulate their behavior a little bit more. And the civility was really important because they began to show one another that they knew how to behave. Those who were in gangs, as we'll mention a little bit later as well, were not getting along when the program first started. They would intentionally do things, sometimes bump each other or make statements that were not only rude but sometimes prejudicial, of course, as their ethnic minorities were different from each other. And so that was a bit of a challenge that the facilitator had to help work through to give that understanding of civility, that in that space and time they were expected to be civil to each other. Which, if any of these aspects on your question here, appeals to you? Which appeals to you? Any of these stand out to you? Not just for this particular study, but in your own locations, what you see every day. Are there separations of duties? Are people doing their duties to help the whole? We know that research says specifically that African American males at the preschool level are sometimes judged harshly and given their disciplinary infractions harshly, more so than those of their non-minority peers. And one research study that you'll find at the very end of this particular presentation will explain that teachers that are in training have even admitted that they do find that they are tracking and they are actually disciplining students, even at the preschool level, that are African American males more harshly than others. There's a fantastic base of studies that can help you to find this out. So we know that this is actually happening. So we want to be careful of that as we are separating our duties and making sure that every person that's involved in our programs is of the same mindset. They have the same information. Okay, so benefits and outcomes. So what exactly happened? Were there any benefits? Were there any good outcomes? There were. At the district level, there was one particular example that was provided to me by the participant who spoke about a student who had disciplinary issues. Now, it was interesting because most of the participants spoke about this student and talked about what a big change there was from the beginning of the program to the very end of the program, so much so that the district was able to award this student with an award at the school board meeting, the annual end of the year school board meeting, to show how this student was able to change over time. And for instance, some of the ways he changes that the disciplinary infractions that were superfluous at the beginning of the year were then down to 0 by the close of the program. Not only that, but you were expected to keep your hair at a certain length, to keep it tidy when you were dressed in your uniform. When it came time to participate in this program each week, the student refused to cut their hair. Halfway through the program, the student decided to cut their hair. I just want to let you all know that the student was also a member of one of the rival gangs from some of the other students in the classroom, and those interactions that were a little more negative, they ceased by the time this particular student was ready to move on to the next grade level at the end of the year and at the end of the program. And in addition to that, he was no longer a borderline student, borderlining at a C level. He had actually moved up and was achieving B's in many classes, and that was a tremendous improvement. Not only was it just happening with this one student, it happened with other students, but this one student was one that all of the participants wanted to explain and wanted to talk about. They considered that a great achievement. The next area we see is partnership growth. That happened for the district in all of these different levels because the community partner brought in guests from these different industries, and that created not only a relationship with the students, but with the district. The district now had additional partners that they could call on, and people who were becoming familiar with one of their schools, so they could call on them again for assistance. Parental and student body recognition and inquiry means parents began asking questions. How could their students get involved in this program? By the time I arrived, it had been it had been going on or in session for 3 years. So the first year, remember, was the pilot year, and that was at no cost to the district. We'll get into that a little bit later briefly. But the second point that was to be made is that the students then wanted to be involved in the second year as well. And everyone just thought it was fantastic that this program was going on, and they wanted to be involved because of the exposure and what the students were learning. Inclusion of additional school and single gender female cohorts happened at the district level. The program, over the course of the years that it was in session before I got there, began to grow, and it grew to other schools within the district. And then of course we can see here what some of the student growth was that the students were actually achieving. Okay. Oh, I want to make sure I give you the questions and the quote. How is success defined in your program? Just take a second. Think about a program in your school that is successful or that you consider to be successful, or in your district, one of the most successful programs within your district or in your community that you've seen. How is that success defined? Is it defined monetarily by how much money is being saved or how much you're not going over budget? Is it defined by student achievement, their grades, their test scores? How is success actually being defined? And how much of that depends on the psychological growth, the mental growth, the emotional growth, the cultural relevancy that these students are able to put forth every day, and then their civil behavior overall? Does that factor into your definition of success? Okay, the challenges. What were the challenges for this particular study, this program, this implementation? We're going to look at the district, the school, and the community partner levels. Let's first look at the finances. The district said we don't have any issues with finances. That's not a problem. It would normally be a challenge, which is why they raised it, but they explained, but it was not a challenge for us because we allowed our school, who had Title I funding, to decide what they wanted to do with that. In addition, this particular community organization did not charge us the first year. It was a pilot. So we didn't have any financial constraints. The school leaders did explain that the only financial constraint they had was that some of the students needed to have items and materials to be able to participate in the program, and that's something that they wanted to offer to them, and that was not necessarily a part of the Title I funding that actually funded the program. So the assistant principal and the principal, they got together and they made sure that they let the community know. I believe they contacted some service groups as well as some churches to say, hey, we need shirts, or we need khakis, we need socks for these students so that they can participate in the program the way they are supposed to. The parents don't have the funds for it. There was even an example explained to me in terms of an activity that inside of the classroom, there was also a sink. One day they took a whole class period and they learned how to wash their clothes. Yes, you heard me correct, because students were showing up without their shirts, or they were rumpled, or they were dirty, and they would explain, as one facilitator explained, that the students said, my mom does not have the money and we don't have a car to get to the laundromat, so I don't have a way to wear a clean shirt. That facilitator said, well, that's not going to be your excuse any longer. I will show you how to wash your clothes. In fact, we all will see what needs to be done when we don't have the clothes to wear that we need. That was almost a tearjerker for me, because that shows a socioeconomic disparity as well as what some would consider to be a cultural issue or challenge for some students. Let's look at the timing. Timing. We all know that timing can be a tremendous challenge sometimes. Remember, this program took place within the school day. So at the district level, time was not an issue, but they did explain from the district perspective that they understood that the school might have a challenge because it was taking place in the school day. By the time I got there, the program had been scaled down from a 45-minute program that happened during the day. During the school day, it was never an after-school program, until a 35-minute period. So they were working really hard to try to get everything done within the time constraints. The school leaders as well as the community partner all agreed that the time that they had to do the program activities was slight and they wanted more. The reach, all three groups said that they wanted a greater reach. They wanted to reach more students. Here are 4 examples of programs where students were definitely being reached. There wasn't an issue in most of these with time, but each one either was missing a cultural component or perhaps they didn't have funding, and all talked about teachers needing to have foundational training in order to achieve these monumental goals that they're expected to achieve. Where's the training? You can see each one of these. You can see references for them at the very end of this presentation, but very briefly, I will tell you about each one. The Multicultural Mosaic program was started, I believe, back in 2010, and it was a school-wide initiative to allow cultural diversity, and here's a word for you that you will hear twice. They wanted to see empathy grow amongst their different minority groups, their ethnic minority groups, because this particular private school had a large number of diverse students and the community was extremely diverse. They did reach out to the community and ask for their assistance. They asked for parents to come in and help them. The Mind Up program, there are 2 parts of this. I want you to see that they infused mindfulness, which means you are teaching students how to breathe. They are using breathing techniques to calm down their minds, to calm down their heart rate. And what this particular study talked about was the neurophysiological benefits of it. And they wanted to help students to experience inhibitory control. And that meant that through practicing these techniques, they would be able to self-regulate their what? Their behavior, their responses to things, their interactions with peers and those around them. So that was the mindfulness technique, and I believe that they were, that this was infused into their actual everyday classes or class time 3 times. So they would stop and do this 3 times at the elementary level. And then a secondary group that we found a program about was actually made up or comprised of 90% Latinx students, and they participated in mindfulness where their heart rates were actually monitored every time they completed their mindfulness breathing techniques. Those students who had a negative perception of the school system in general and systematic racism, no trust institutionally, those students were a little reluctant, according to the study, to participate, but at the end of the time period that this study ran, not only did they have better control and better self-regulation over their own behaviors, but those who were also of the mindset that their perception of school was more positive, they also had gains. So there were significant gains. In the Multicultural Mosaic program, one drawback was that they did not see a significant gain in the amount of empathy growing between students for one another in terms of their cultural backgrounds. Safe and Civil Schools, a huge, huge undertaking, a large program. You may have heard of it before. Talks about safety and interactions, and helps to allow the teachers to have such training that they can make retention higher, have peer-to-peer interactions soaring. So it's one of those schools or one of those school programs that is dependent on financial. They have, the schools have financial backing to be able to implement this program. But one point that was made specific in the study was that teachers needed foundational training. No matter what program, what aspect of the program was being implemented, if the teachers did not have the foundational training, if they didn't have the buy-in, if they were not included, then whatever we expect to achieve inside of our school is not going to happen with the students. And then the last one is training of intercultural competence and tolerance, what they call the TICT program. That was actually one that took place in Russia. So this gives us a global perspective that we're all looking for the same thing. There were 130 ethnicities that were involved in this particular study amongst middle school students in the North and South Federations of Russia. So the movement of the students from one area to the next caused, of course, a bit of a clash within the system. Sometimes we think if individuals are from the same location, from the same country, oh, they don't have any problems, they're not different ethnic groups. Yes, they are, and they were in this particular study. And you can find a lot of work here by Lebedeva. You can look in the references area to kind of follow this study as they are constantly adding more to it. They placed a big emphasis on counselors as well as teacher training. That was a fantastic study if you're able to look at any of those. This says, which can you proactively anticipate in your problem, in your program, I apologize, as a challenge? Can you anticipate financial issues or issues with time constraints or the reach, wanting to reach out to more students, but you just don't have the time or the finances or the staff or something to be able to get this done? Take a moment to jot that down. Okay, so what basically emerged here to tie together this entire study? Number one, some things that were reveals or revelations, the school level. Typically, we find leadership programs at the middle and the high school level, not really at the elementary school level, although research tells us that the brain is most malleable in the elementary school years. It's when we're able to mold and help students to become the fantastic individuals that they can, and to also reduce prejudices that they may actually openly begin to demonstrate as they move throughout middle school. The theme was interesting. We don't find leadership programs at the elementary school level very often. We find programs for mindfulness, as we showed you, social and emotional learning, so SEL. You see that often. We find programs even that help students to become democratically mindful. We talked about civic education, even at the elementary school level, and definitely in middle and high. It is rare to find a leadership program at the elementary school level. CRP is culturally relevant pedagogy. There are 3 domains. It was created by Latz and Billings, Gloria Latz and Billings. You can find the reference at the end of her seminal work. The first domain is to expect, or teachers need to expect, high academic expectations from our students. They need to stick to that. The second is that our students need to learn about their own cultural identities and then about at least one other cultural group actively. And that should be facilitated with some assistance and guidance from our teachers. The third domain, and this says unknown because it was unknown. It's called socio-political consciousness, where our students can take a look at their environments and their communities. They can see what's going on around them, and then they're able to talk about it through the guidance of their teachers, helping them to speak. As we just had our example about the students who needed to wash their clothes. That is definitely something that was not just a small occurrence in their particular community, but it was a large occurrence in that community. That's a part of their socio-political consciousness. How do they feel about that? You know, why do they think that's happening? To be able to speak about this openly will help to reduce some feelings of anger and resentment later on that could also lead to a lack of retention for our school districts and then future incarceration or other things that we don't want to see happen with our students. We say unknown here because in this particular program, it was not known readily that number one, CRP was being introduced to students, and number two, that socio-political consciousness was even a thing. You know, they didn't know about it, but yet their program demonstrated all of these areas. And the last is civil. As defined by Ewald, Civil Leadership in 2001 is the only reference we found to this, and we've taken it since then and we have expanded it and made it something new, which you'll see 2 slides later. But it's defined as being able to get along with dissimilar groups, and this was at the higher education level, where Ewald noticed during that time that higher education individuals were not able to get along with each other, the teachers nor the students. And we talked about civil leadership, taking leadership to take ownership of your behavior and your actions. So we have this wonderful quote here, as you've seen before also. Just remember that the education programs that you are helping to implement are making a large impact and making gainful differences in the lives of your students. Recommendations. What do we recommend for the school district and for the schools? Well, these are some of the things we recommended. You can take a look at them, but one of the most important was that when you are implementing a new program, like they were into the school, or into any school, it's important to make sure that the program goals, the mission, and your vision is actually in alignment with the model and the mission also of the school district or the schools, because sometimes our schools have different themes, but there is always an overarching understanding of what a particular model is for a school district. You wanted to make sure that you figure out what this is, set up a matrix before we say, yes, okay, bring the program into our school. Well, does it really fit? Does it fit the parameters of what we're looking for? Then also accountability. And in this particular school system and in this program, there was not an accountability report that was expected, nor was it required per se. So that's something you want to be mindful of. It not only helps the community partner and the schools, but it helps the entire district to ensure this is done. By the time I arrived at the school level, the community partners were beginning to provide pre and post surveys to the students. But prior to that time, there was no pre or post survey or anything that could help them get some gainful statistics on whether or not this particular program was being successful, or whether or not at the district level you were getting a return on the investment that was coming from the schools. A volunteer dedicated staff member, sometimes it would be good to reach out and get parents involved and have one staff member that can participate inside the school session, so that you didn't have different people. That would create continuity for the students, and it would help create a better effect, a gelling effect with the community partner. Okay, so overall, this particular study helped to define the rebirth of what we call K12 civil leadership, because this study showed many of these components and how important it was for, number one, the nature of prejudice to be mindful in all of our minds, whereas the seminal theorist of this was named Alport. And he said a long time ago that prejudice is in every person. That doesn't mean that you might be against a person because of the color of their skin, but the saying was that prejudice is inherent. It is intrinsic. We all have it for some reason. So recognize first that this is a part of the human development or the human psyche before you move forward to be able to assist your students. Just first recognize that it's there. It could be you like brown over green, or you like peas over potatoes, or something of that nature, but prejudice is there from the start of our lives, according to Alport. CRP, we just talked about the 3 domains. These are very important when you're implementing a program and you have ethnic minority students who are trying to find themselves, who are looking out in the media. They're seeing these visceral images of adults that are the same color as them, speak the same language that they speak, you know, have the same ethnic minority background or socioeconomic background. You know, we need to be able to show them in the school systems that we culturally or that we understand and we appreciate them culturally, and that we are always trying to do better, that we are being models, because we know through social learning theory that whatever they see us doing is what they're going to also replicate. So we need to show that CRP is important to us, culturally relevant pedagogy, all 3 domains, not just 1 or 2 or 3, or the third one, but all 3 need to be together and acted together as best you can. Civil leadership, we understand that that was originally postulated at the higher education level, but we are now rebirthing it at the K-12 level, and also making it inclusive of all of these components, not just to be able to get along with dissimilar groups, but you're able to do that because you have an understanding that there is a prejudice that is already there, and then you also understand that CRP is what you need to have in order to first move forward, to be able to understand and get along with the dissimilar groups. And then holistic collaboration, holistic meaning that we take the whole of something, we take the small parts and bring it together in the whole, and we see that whole component as one that is harmonious and can be advanced. I'll say it again, it is harmonious, but it can be advanced. That is holistic collaboration, in which the district level, community partners, and school leaders work together with the parents and student families, and you try to make a difference. This is K-12 civil leadership. And this is what we want to see, our students growing and being able to move forward. These are some references for you. You are welcome to send me questions. You can email me if you want to have some of these, or if you're not able to actually take a screenshot or get the video or what have you, and I'll be glad to elaborate on more of them. But in the end, I just want to say teachers and schools should not underestimate the power they hold on affecting society as a whole through the teaching of students. We see here what can happen if all 4 of these pieces, these groups, come together. They can do something great for the students, and to be able to continue that into the middle school years is also a challenge, but if we work together, it can be done. Thank you so much for taking the time to come and look at this presentation. I appreciate it, and thank you for being a part of NAMI. Have a fantastic day.